Today I'll be going over Chapter 3 of Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. Chapter 3 is titled, All Great Neptune's Ocean. This chapter begins with a quote from Macbeth, Act 2, Scene 2. Quote, Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red, end quote. Okay, so I'm not a big Shakespeare person, and I don't understand this Old English stuff, so I had to Google its meaning. It says Macbeth is saying, could even the whole ocean wash this blood off my hands? No. Instead, my bloody hands would turn the entire green sea red. In plain English, he has just murdered King Duncan, and the blood on his hands represents both the literal blood and his overwhelming guilt. He knows washing his hands will not truly cleanse him because the crime is now part of him psychologically and morally. So the deeper meaning is, Macbeth feels his guilt is so enormous that instead of the ocean cleaning him, his guilt would contaminate the whole ocean. It shows how horrified and shaken he is right after the murder. Wow, that's pretty deep. Nash says in 1957, Tom Parker was traveling back to California from Tennessee with 23-year-old Byron Raphael behind the wheel. Raphael was a young William Morris trainee whom Parker had pulled from the mailroom a year before to work as his assistant. Parker's tough training style became legendary in Hollywood, but at the time, Byron Raphael simply saw him as Pops, someone he both loved and feared. Nash writes, quote, The Parker School for Trainees would become part of Hollywood legend for both the rigor and the humiliation that the manager foisted on his students. But at the time, Raphael only knew that he loved and feared the man he called Pops, end quote. Parker, who had no children, told Raphael he saw him like an adopted son. Whether he fully meant it or not, Parker trusted him enough on that long road trip to reveal a major secret. Raphael remembered driving through snowy Hobbs, New Mexico, where the car kept sliding on the road. They stopped at a small motel with limited rooms, so Raphael had to share a room with Parker that night. Raphael remembers, he started out by telling me about how he was made a colonel by the governor of Louisiana. And then he said, Where do you think I was born? I said, Well, I guess Tennessee. And he just told me the story. He said he made a deal with somebody to come over and he worked in the kitchen of the ship as a dishwasher, I think. Parker told Raphael he was supposed to stay only 60 days and then return home, but he wanted to stay in America and disappear into carnival work. And even though he had no money, he didn't pick up his paycheck because he feared they'd find out where he was. Nash writes, quote, his route, from what he told various sources, was through the island of Curacao in the Dutch West Indies via England. From Rotterdam, he sailed for one of the British ports, probably Southampton, with a possible stop in France to pick up cargo. If he took a passenger ship to England, he likely would have jumped to a tramper or a freighter for the run to the Dutch West Indies, since the passenger ships concerned themselves with North Atlantic trade, end quote. Parker later wrote his family and told them that an English friend helped him get the papers he needed to enter the United States, probably a passport and visa. But it's unclear whether he became Tom Parker during a stop in the British Isles or, as his sister now believes, while he was still in Holland. If Parker already had a Dutch passport, as some family members believed, then the bigger mystery is why he needed new papers under a different name. Nash says whatever the truth was, Parker appeared to be making a serious effort to cover his tracks. In Curacao, he seems to have switched boats again and moved on quickly. Nash writes, quote, From here, the picture of Andre Van Kalk, just weeks away from his 20th birthday, begins to blur. In all probability, he entered the United States through the Gulf port of Mobile, Alabama, although the names recorded in the ship's manifest for that year failed to bear witness to Andreas Van Kalk or Thomas Parker. Dirk Valenga, the journalist who chronicled Parker's Dutch origins, first for the Breda newspaper De Stem, and later in a biography, Elvis and the Colonel, speculates that Andre came in on a rum runner, a boat transporting illegal liquor to America. According to Lloyd Shearer of Parade magazine, Parker himself said he gained entry through Mobile on a Dutch fishing boat. Either way, that would have been the boat that issued the paycheck he never picked up, end quote. Those past events seem to be weighing on Parker in 1957, the morning after he opened up to Byron Raphael at the motel. Raphael remembers, That's when he told me the rest of the story, how fearful he was that he might be deported, or if he ever left the country that he might not be able to get back in. He said, You know, Byron, we're never going to be able to take Elvis abroad to do personal appearances. By that time, Elvis was already the biggest star in Japan and also in Germany. and the offers from Europe were for many millions of dollars even then. Nash says Parker had such a powerful presence that Raphael never thought to question him. Even though Parker was famous, wealthy, and well-connected, Raphael didn't ask why he couldn't simply get help with his passport problems. The issue likely wasn't that Parker couldn't leave the country. He had powerful government connections, including President Lyndon B. Johnson, who probably could have helped fix his passport problem easily. Parker's real issue was that he didn't want to leave. Even the chance to make huge money couldn't convince him to go. Nash writes, quote, "For a man who judged the worth of every deal by money alone, such virulent aversion to international travel begs two nagging questions. Why had he never registered with the U.S. government, bypassing as late as 1940 the safety net of the Alien Registration Act, which required all aliens to comply with the law, but did not discriminate between legal and illegal residents? And what was outside the refuge of the United States that frightened a man who otherwise seemed afraid of nothing?" End quote. Marion Smith, a historian at the Immigration and Naturalization Service in Washington, D.C., says that the Smith Act wouldn't have made Parker legal automatically, but as an overstayed seaman, he could have registered and applied for certain forms of relief. Marion says, "And I am curious as to why he didn't. Failure to register was subject to punishment, but I'm sure he could have later just paid a fine. It's very odd." Nash says Parker's mysterious past led to all kinds of theories, including that he may have been a minor government spy or carried papers for a radical group. But she points out that this doesn't really fit, since Parker had already left Europe before that kind of wartime activity began. And that theory also seems unlikely because Parker's family said he had no political interests. Plus, even if he had been paid, that kind of selfless risk didn't really match his personality. The second theory was that Parker fled Holland after stabbing a man in a fairgrounds fight. But that story, which was published in British tabloid The People in 1997, is shaky because the reporter tied to it didn't remember it, and even the FBI, which was credited as a source, had no record of it. Nash says the third story is much harder to dismiss. If it's true, it could explain the strange and secretive behavior surrounding Parker's past. Shortly after Elvis passed away in August 1977, Dutch journalist Dirk Verlenge was at his desk at De Stem when he got a phone call from an anonymous man. The man said, "Do you know that Colonel Tom Parker comes from Breda? His name is Van Kalk, and his father was a stable keeper for Van Gendeloos on the Vlazak." Verlenge had heard this information before from earlier Elvis fan publications, first in 1967 by Deneke Deckers in the fan club magazine It's Elvis Time, and then again in Hans Langbroek's 1970 booklet, The Hillbilly Cat, but he had treated it as just a rumor at the time. Verlenge became curious and started digging into Parker's early life by interviewing his family and old classmates to piece together the story of Breda's famous runaway. His first big article on Parker came out in September 1977, and it launched a long-running fascination. Even after leaving his position as reporter and becoming an editor, he kept returning to Parker's story for decades. He ended one article writing, "Did something serious happen before Parker left that summer in 1929 for America? Or maybe in the 1930s when he broke all contact with his family in Breda?" Nash writes, quote, "One reader thought he knew the answer and in 1980 mailed a letter to Verlenge at the newspaper. The document had a hushed, dark alley tone as if its author were afraid that someone might be reading over his shoulder. It carried no signature, but the urgency and gravity of the words made it seem somehow real, as if the author experienced an unburdening in the telling. Here's what the letter said, quote, "Gentlemen, at last I want to say what was told to me 19 years ago about this Colonel Parker. My mother-in-law said to me, if anything comes to light about this Parker, tell them that his name is Van Kalk and that he murdered the wife of a greengrocer on the Bostrat in Breda. This murder has never been solved, but look it up and you will discover that he, on that very night, left for America and adopted a different name. And that is why it is so mysterious. That's why he does not want to be known. But believe me, this is the truth and nothing but the truth. It has been told to me in confidence. I've been carrying it around with me for years, and I'm glad now that I can tell you what happened. This is the truth. Thank you." End quote. Okay, so Tom Parker, a murderer? Anyway, Verlenge wasn't sure what to believe at first, but he was intrigued when he discovered that there had been such a murder. Nash writes, quote, "Anna Van Dendenen, a 23-year-old newlywed, the wife of the potato trader Willem Van Dendenen, had been bludgeoned to death in the kitchen of her home behind the shop. The crime was what the Dutch call a roofmoord, a murder with intention of robbery, since the bedroom and bathroom had been ransacked in an apparent search for money. More surprising, the date, May 17, 1929, coincided with Andre's sudden disappearance." end quote. Nash says the original Dutch police report was over 130 handwritten pages, but a closer look today shows their murder investigation was poorly handled. Police never positively identified the murder weapon, which was most likely a crowbar. They didn't look deeply into the victim's background, and they quickly focused on Anna's brother-in-law, Jan Vendenen, after witnesses placed him near the shop. They detained him and didn't look for anyone else. Jan was eventually let go, and to this day, Anna's murder is still unsolved. Nash says there's no evidence connecting Andre Van Kalk to Anna Van Dendenen's murder. His name wasn't in the police report, and no one linked him to the crime until the anonymous letter appeared 51 years later. Nash writes, quote, "Yet a set of circumstances makes it impossible not to speculate that Colonel Tom Parker, in fact, may have gotten away with murder," end quote. She says that even though Andre had been away in Rotterdam and America for years, he probably knew Anna before her marriage, either from childhood or from when he returned to Breda at 18. Andre and Anna were only 3 years apart in age and likely crossed paths through the same church, St. Joseph Kirk, and Andre also knew her husband's family. Johannes Vendenen ran the cafe where Andre's father spent Sundays, and the family lived just around the corner from the Van Gendelu stables. On top of that, Anna's husband, Willem, also had something in common with Andre. He enjoyed the kermis, or the traveling fair, and even traveled to distant towns for it. Nash says there was another possible link. Anna's green grocery, located at Nieuwe Bosstraat 31, was on the same street Andre used for school. Since he liked fruit, Nash suggests he may have stopped there as a boy and known the market well. She writes, quote, "Certainly he would have known the shop, even if it had been in the hands of a previous owner when he was a child. And he would have remembered that of the two doors in the front, only the middle door led inside the shop. Then, too, the Van Kalk family is unsure which grocer employed him for deliveries when he first left school. Had this been the one?" End quote. Bosstraat is where his mother moved after being evicted from the stables after his father died. Whenever Andre came back to Breda after 16, it was that home he visited. Andre was probably in Breda when Anna was murdered, since it happened right before Pentecost, which was an important Catholic holiday like Easter that gave people extra time off and the opportunity to travel and visit family. Nash says it seems likely Andre would have gone home for the holiday instead of spending it alone in the gloomy hostel above his employer's office in Rotterdam. She says people who were familiar with the habits of Andre and later Parker would find certain little details in the police report especially interesting. Witnesses described seeing a man in a fancy costume, a dark fantasy jacket costume, come out of the shop at the hour the murder was committed, though one person thought he recognized him as Jan Vendenen. Other witnesses described seeing a sharply dressed man near or leaving the shop with details like a gray overcoat, fancy trousers, a black hat, and possibly a light yellow raincoat. Nash writes, quote, "Any of those outfits might have belonged to Andre. A fantasy jacket reflects his obsession with kermis. He wore a gray suit to his father's funeral, and in a letter he wrote to his mother when he first moved to Rotterdam, he talked about his plan to buy a raincoat and hat. And in the 1950s, when his closet held a variety of large overshirts worn loose and over the belt, the majority of them were his favorite color, light yellow," end quote. Another witness later came forward, a meat delivery boy who claimed he saw the same man in the yellow raincoat leaving the fruit shop around the time Anna was murdered. The boy later saw the same man in, quote, a conflict of words with a woman around 60 years old. The boy describes her as pretty chubby around the hips and a very slim face. She had gray hair, which she wore in a twist on the head. This description would have fit Maria Van Kalk perfectly. Nash wonders if Maria may have had an argument with her son, a young man who had changed so much while away that others might not have easily recognized him. She says one puzzling detail from the police report may have a simple explanation. Whoever killed Anna had sprinkled white pepper around her body. The intruder also sprinkled the floor leading into the bathroom and on the marble top of both drawers in the bedrooms and in the hall from the bedroom to the stairs, and descending into the hall which led from the shop to the kitchen. Nash writes, quote, "A young man who had worked with the training of dogs surely knew that police used German shepherds in the tracking of criminals, even in the Holland of 1929, and he also might have thought that a snout full of pepper would have prevented them from picking up a scent. But even more coincidental is the fact that the author of the anonymous letter referenced 1961 as the year he was told the story. That was the year that Ad Van Kalk, Andre's younger brother, flew to Los Angeles and met with the man who called himself Colonel Tom Parker. It was the first time anyone in the family had seen him since 1929, and yet when Ad returned to Holland, he refused to talk about his trip, arousing suspicion with his siblings that he had either been bought off or threatened." end quote. Nash says the real question is whether the anonymous letter writer actually knew the truth or was repeating an old rumor. Parker later claimed he came to America in 1928, which could either support his innocence or raise questions about whether he was trying to distance himself from the 1929 murder. She says there's no way to know if Andre went to the fruit shop that morning, but if he did, perhaps he may have only intended to rob Anna, knock her out, and steal money to get back to America. Was that the money Andre left behind in the trunk? Had he been too scared to change the guilders to dollars after things had gone so wrong? The intruder likely thought the building was empty because Wilhelm was out making deliveries and had locked the door behind him. Had the intruder been startled by Anna and panicked? Anna was attacked from behind at the sink and hit with terrible force. The attacker immediately realized he had gone too far and tried to stop the bleeding with torn fabric found nearby. But it was all for naught. She was dead where she fell. Nash wonders if Andre could truly be capable of such a horrendous act. Todd Slaughter, who was the president of the Elvis Presley fan club of Great Britain and became friends with Parker the last 25 years of his life, said, "I really don't think there was a murder in him. He was a noisy character, but I don't think there was any brute force within his psyche at all." Not everyone shared that sentiment, though. Lamar Fike, a member of the Memphis Mafia, who would later work with Parker in the 70s, said, "I don't think there's any doubt that he killed that woman. He had a terrible temper. He and I got into some violent fights. We fought all the time. When we started arguing, people would get up and leave the table. Everybody was just a nervous wreck." Byron Raphael said, "I never saw him hit anybody other than to shove his assistant, Tom Diskin, one time. But he did have a violent temper and a terrible mean streak, and it took very little to set him off. In those fits of rage, he was a very dangerous man, and he certainly appeared capable of killing. He would be nice one second and stare off like he was lost. And then, boom, tremendous force. He'd just snap. You never saw it coming. Then 5 minutes later, he would be so gentle, telling a nice soft story." Nash says the violence against Anna seemed too intense and personal for a simple burglary. That kind of fury may have come from frustration or something more emotional. She writes, "Had Andre just learned of her 5-week-old marriage and gone to the fruit market for a confrontation, perhaps after a night of drinking? Might she have said something that unleashed a torrent of emotion, something that drove the humiliated Andre in a flash of anger to pick up a heavy tool and strike all sense out of her, then rob the house to mask his motivation? Only Andre and Anna know that now, speaking the truth with no tongue, no mouth, and no throat, nestled in the cool, dark folds of death." End quote. Parker's family in Holland emotionally rejected the idea that Andre could have been a murderer. His sister Marie, the former nun, insisted it simply could not be true. If it was, his mother would have known. Nash says this strange story had one more twist 53 years later. While researching Andre's move to America, Dirk Valenga wrote to American journalist Lloyd Shearer for help piecing the facts together. Parker had ignored Valenga's own letter, so Valenga hoped Lloyd Shearer could get answers from Parker since Shearer knew him professionally. Nash writes, quote, "To Valenga's delight, he soon received a telephone call from Lloyd Shearer. At first, the men chatted about the weather and exchanged pleasantries. But as Shearer talked on, Valenga noticed that Shearer spoke with a familiar accent, something about the way he pronounced his R's and J's, and that he seemed hoarse, like a man who might be trying to disguise his voice. Valenga dismissed those thoughts momentarily, as Shearer was most intrigued by the Dutchman's questions about Parker's past, and the two journalists agreed to correspond about the matter." End quote. Valenga sent several letters, but he never heard back from Lloyd Shearer, who was later lost to Alzheimer's disease. And he didn't hear from Tom Parker. Or did he? Valenga now believes the call may not have come from Lloyd Shearer at all, and Shearer's wife agreed with that suspicion. The phone call was between two Dutchmen who were both deeply curious about the mystery surrounding Dries van Kuik. That's it for Chapter 3. Stay tuned for Chapter 4, which is titled Missing in Action. See you then.